Welcome to this talk about philosophical zombies. Philosophical zombies are not the kind of zombies we see in films or series. So, like The Walking Dead, the zombies there walk around and they're kind of crazy and they haven't really got, and they're not alive, they're dead, and we know that they're dead. And they don't seem like us. Philosophical zombies are different. Philosophical zombies, they act like us, they behave like us, they're effectively replicas of us. And looking at them from the outside, so to speak, we wouldn't see any difference between them and us. The thing about a philosophical zombie is the idea that you could have that and that being could exist, but that there was nothing going on inside. There's just blank. There's no consciousness. There's no experience happening in there. So, what's the kind of point of the thought experiment of philosophical zombie? Well, when David Chalmers first developed it, although it may have kind of earlier iterations, the point about philosophical zombies is an ontological claim. It's trying to make claim about the world and about existence. It's saying something like the fundamental categories of existence are not just physical. Right? There isn't physicalism doesn't cover everything. There's a domain of existence which we could call the mental, which is non-physical or can't be reduced to the physical. Right? So it's an ontological thesis. When I say ontological thesis, I mean it's a thesis about being. It starts from the assumption that consciousness itself doesn't fit very well into nature. And we've seen in this course that people like William James and Colin McGinn and other philosophers have marveled at this deep problem of consciousness, right? How is it that a brain, a soggy, wet organ up here in your head, can produce this amazing set of rich experiences and audio experiences and gustatory experiences, and what it is to be alive? How does that fit into the physical world? How does the physical world create it? It's just a deep mystery. And the claim that Chalmers is trying to make is that, and he says somewhere, we know that they're connected, but we don't really understand how they're connected, right? We don't really know how they're connected. And the claim is one of the reasons we can't really fully explain it is because it's different. Consciousness does not easily reduce to the physical. So it's an argument for property dualism, not substance dualism. So remember, property dualism is claiming that there's really only physical substances, but there are different kinds of properties. Physical properties, things like the weight of my brain, the temperature of a room, that kind of stuff. But we also have mental properties. People believe things, people desire things, people feel things. And those mental properties are not going to be fully reducible to the laws of physics. So let's do a deep dive into the philosophical zombies thought experiment. Before we do that, we need to look at some technical terms around the language of possibility. Okay, so we need to understand three different concepts of possibility in philosophy. The first I'm going to call physical possibility. Physical possibility is what philosophers mean by what's possible according to the laws of physics. So it's a large domain, but if you think about it in terms of philosophy, it's actually the smallest domain. It's what's physically possible according to the laws, as I've said, of physics. So it will tell you at what temperature water might boil, even if the air pressure is different. It could be at different temperatures, but effectively it's constrained by the laws of physics, right? So this is basically the laws of physics and what are consistent with it. Those are what we call physical possibilities. Okay. Then we have something called logical possibility, and logical possibility is a much wider area. So logical possibility draws a huge kind of rectangle around physical possibility, and logical possibility denotes what does not cause a contradiction in thinking. That's strictly speaking what logical possibility is. So I can imagine all kinds of things which, although they might not be physically possible, are logically possible. We'll put that as logical possibility. I might be able to imagine myself jumping over Mount Everest in one leap. That's the kind of thing that's depicted in a film, and it doesn't lead to any kind of contradiction. Okay? I might depict, as Hume famously did, one billiard ball hitting another. And even though both billiard balls are on a fairly flat surface, flat here, but you get the point, we could imagine ball A hitting ball B, even though ball B is just sitting there like a normal billiard ball, ball A coming back rather than ball B moving. That's logically possible. You could imagine it. It doesn't lead to a contradiction. Anything outside of that we would call logical impossibility, or something that's impossible. Okay, so square circles, round rectangles are not possible. They can't exist. So they're outside of this domain. Now, philosophers have postulated the existence of what they call metaphysical possibility, which is a middle ground. Metaphysical possibility is the idea that something could happen. It doesn't break the laws of physics to happen, but it also doesn't break the laws of our thinking, the essence of the thing. So, for example, even though I was born in Europe, I may have been born without breaking the laws of physics in Asia. So, as I was born in China, that's metaphysically possible. Call that metaphysical possible. I would still have been myself if I'd been born in China. But what isn't possible, according to these philosophers, is for water to be something other than H2O. It's only it's metaphysically possible for water to be H2O because that's what we mean by water. Okay, so for example, it's logically possible that water could have been C2O. We could imagine that about contradicting ourselves. But actually, according to the laws of nature, according to the laws of physics, and therefore according to what we call metaphysical possibility, if water wasn't H2O, it wouldn't actually be water. We mean by water in this world, in the metaphysical world, like ours, is that we're talking about H2O. If water wasn't H2O, it'd be something else. Now, the claim here, metaphysical possibility, that zombies, when we imagine them, are not us without consciousness, they're something else. Okay, so I now want to have a deep dive into the actual primary source here, it's Chalmers' essay. I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs from it, and then while I do that, I'm going to kind of explain it as I go along, because I think it's really important to get right into the meat of this. So let's get into it. Right. The argument goes as this. It's conceivable that there is a system that is physically identical to a conscious being, but that lacks at least some of the being's conscious states. Such a system might be called a zombie. A system is physically identical to a conscious being, but lacks consciousness entirely. These systems will look identical to a normal conscious being from the third-person perspective. In particular, their brain process will be molecule to molecule identical with the original, and their behavior will be indistinguishable. But things will be different from the first-person point of view. There is nothing it's like to be a zombie. Okay, so I just want to explain the difference between third-person and first-person perspective. So third-person perspective is you looking at me looking at someone else. The third-person perspective is the perspective from the outside. So I can be looking at somebody and thinking about them and realizing that they have beliefs or desires or thoughts, and I can build up a theory about their mind, right? That's the third-person perspective. I've not gone into their consciousness. I can't do that. I can't be acquainted, as we know from epistemology, with what's going on in their head, but I can infer from their body and their movements and their gestures and so on and so forth. I can think that they're probably conscious. So that's what we mean by the third-person perspective. You can think of it as the objective perspective. And the perspective we have to take when we're thinking theoretically about things and when we're thinking about, in a way, like scientists, objectively about things. But the first-person perspective is me. It's this looking out, right? So what he's saying here is that the zombie, the experience that the zombie has, there isn't experience. There isn't perspective. In a sense, there's no first-person perspective for the zombie. The first-person perspective is looking out at the world, the experience of looking out at the world, right? So there's this difference, right? The zombie can be understood to exist from the third-person perspective. They behave like us, but from inside, there's nothing going on. And now let's look at the next argument, or the way that he's put the argument formally. And so he writes it as thus. 1, it's conceivable that there are zombies. 2, if it's conceivable that there are zombies, it's metaphysically possible that there are zombies. 3, if it's metaphysically possible there are zombies, then consciousness is not physical. 4, consciousness is non-physical. Now, the way that people will try to attack property dualism is by attacking one of the first three premises. Okay, so they're going to either say something like, it's not conceivable that there are zombies. They're going to attack that first premise. Or they're going to say, even if it is conceivable that there are zombies, that doesn't mean it's metaphysically possible there are zombies. Or three, they're going to say, even if it's metaphysically possible there are zombies, that doesn't really tell us very much about the actual world and therefore is philosophically uninteresting. If anyone can kind of destroy one of those premises, then they're destroying a chain in the argument which will lead to us not accepting the conclusion. And that's what we find philosophers trying to do. But that's for the next video.